My grandmother was 97 years old, and she would have been 98 this year. And she shares a birthday with my youngest son, Jack. She was a Leo, and she was just this firecracker of a woman who was so incredibly strong. You know, this is a woman who was raised in rural Idaho during the Great Depression, and, you know, was a school teacher and was a music teacher, and just had the most incredible life when I reflect back on it. And I really truly believe that had somebody asked her before she passed away if she felt that she was wealthy in all areas of her life, she would have said yes. This is Leah Steele, aka The Wealth Witch, and this is my podcast. I'm here to activate you to remembrance of your divine birthright to be wealthy in all areas of your life. This podcast is for people ready to have controversial conversations about the financial control, manipulation, and tyranny that faces humanity today. I'm gonna live in freedom, freedom. I'm gonna live my destiny. I'm gonna live my freedom, freedom. I'm gonna live, the time is right now. The Wealth Witch. It's for the people who are ready to wake up, deconstruct their wealth programming, and free themselves from the financial slavery consciousness that serves the global financial agenda. I'm committed to realizing a new global wealth paradigm where economic freedom is the reality and where you get to design and live the life of your dreams. Now let's do the damn thing. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wealth Witch podcast. I am your host, Leah Steele, Wealth Witch, prophetess, oracle. I'm in the process of really looking at and evaluating what I'm calling myself these days. So I'm trying on some different names for size. The Wealth Witch obviously will always be near and dear and a very big part of my brand. But yeah, I'm feeling a lot of new rebirthing energy that's happening right now. And it's really interesting how it's coming about because obviously we've had a couple weeks of breaks in the podcast and I don't typically do that. So even if I do need to take a week off here or there, we'll repurpose something that I've done, either a masterclass or a live stream or something like that, so that we're making sure that we're putting out consistent content. But some of you may know that I'm actually on a 6-week trip away from Bali. And it's been really interesting because I've actually been on the island for 2.5 years. And the last trip that I had taken off the island was to Kuala Lumpur in March of 2020. Well, I guess that makes it 2 years then. It's been just 2 years. Yeah, so 2 years. But essentially for all of the pandemic, I stayed on the island of Bali. I took one flight to a neighboring island, Lombok. And that was the only time that I was on a plane in 2 years. And I got an opportunity to come on this really incredible trip around Europe and Dubai with my very good friend, Taryn Lee, who has guested on this podcast in the past, to really branch out and really begin to look at what women's leadership in business looks like in 2022 and beyond in this new paradigm of doing business and living life and, you know, kind of what I hope will be post-pandemic life here coming in the next year or so. And so a couple of things. One, I hadn't been off the island in 2 years, so I was a little bit anxious about that. And so in the week leading up to leaving, it didn't quite, I got an episode out, but it came out late that week. And then, then the next week we were traveling and I was extremely jet lagged and we landed in Berlin was our first stop and Berlin was freezing cold. And it was a huge shock to my system because I'd been in Bali for 2 years. And, just getting off the island, it was a bit of a shock and it took me some real adjustment time that first week. And so I didn't record a podcast. And then last week, my beautiful, beautiful grandmother, Barbara Ravenscroft Fagg, passed away. And that was while I was in Paris. And Paris for me was a down week. And I had very, very little work to do. I hadn't taken a week off in
I don't even know how long. I honestly can't remember the last time I took a week off. And so Paris was some downtime for me that week. And then my grandmother died and I was planning to record the podcast, but I just wasn't really in a space to do it. So now here we are, like almost a month. Well, I guess like 3.5 weeks since I've released a podcast. So thank you for your patience. Those of you that are regular and loyal listeners, because I know that that's not normal for me to do, but I did just need to take a little bit of time to, process the leaving of the island and that culture shock. And then obviously my grandmother passing and, spending some time with that. And through all of this, it's really interesting because I've been feeling this really incredible rebirthing energy, rebirthing in my personal life, rebirthing in my professional life, rebirthing of my business, really wanting to revamp some things. My other business, Healy, is like going through a huge rebirth as well. And so I wanted to come in and really, first of all, dedicate this podcast to my grandmother. And I want to talk in this podcast about holistic wealth and what that means to me, because you hear me talk about it a lot and it's in my bio and it's on my website, but I want to talk about what that really means to me. And I think that my grandmother was such a beautiful, beautiful representation of what holistic wealth is. So I'm going to talk about that. But I also just want to say, like, it's been really interesting for me because, obviously, I'm a mom and I have kids and I have human kids and I have fur kids. And it's been, really interesting for me this week because the longest I've ever been away from my children was 2 weeks. And so now I'm like edging up on 3.5 weeks that I've been away from them. And this week's been really hard and I've really been missing them and I've really been missing home and, really been like feeling those maternal, instincts and nudges that I don't actually often feel that much when I'm home. I talk about this a lot, how I'm like, I'm not really the nurturing one in my family. Like I'm very much like all business and goals and, objectives. And I do, my friends would say that I'm nurturing, I think, but I just don't really see myself that way. It was actually really interesting because my 16-year-old son, actually, International Women's Day just passed, obviously. And my 16-year-old son sent me this really beautiful, message on International Women's Day. And he put in there that he had created a acronym for my name for International Women's Day. And he put L for leader, E for extremely hardworking, A for always pursuing goals, and H for handsome, which I thought was super cute. But then he said to me, and thank you for shaping me into who I am and being there for me. You're the best wealth witch. We joke about the wealth witch thing because we are always playing like board games and stuff and like life and Uno. We play Uno for fake money and I'm always winning. And so he's always joking with me about being the wealth witch. And he's like, can you just not be the wealth witch when we're playing family games? Anyway, I digress. That was a little bit of a tangent, but so all of this stuff, like my kind of maternal instincts kicking up and realizing that like family for me is a big part of holistic wealth, like my children being happy and, having the things that they need to thrive and, being healthy and happy and in an environment that really supports them to excel, like that to me is wealth. And when my children are happy and I receive messages like that from my 16-year-old son, it shows me that I've done a good job of modeling holistic wealth for my children. And as I was reflecting on that, I was really thinking that like it was my grandmother who really showed me this and she modeled it. She didn't teach it. She didn't speak it. It wasn't like something that I think that she was consciously doing, but unconsciously, she modeled such a beautiful example of holistic wealth to me. My grandmother was 97 years old and, She would have been 98 this year, and she shares a birthday with my youngest son, Jack. She was a Leo, and she was just this firecracker of a woman who was so incredibly strong. You know, this is a woman who was raised in rural Idaho during the Great Depression, and, you know, was a school teacher and was a music teacher, and just had the most incredible life when I reflect back on it. And I really truly believe that had somebody asked her before she passed away if she felt that she was wealthy in all areas of her life, she would have said yes. And, you know, for me, my grandmother, I think her lowest priority when it comes to, you know, what we look at as wealth, or what I look at as holistic wealth, would be financial. Like, that would have been her lowest priority. However, she and my grandfather did an incredible job of being excellent custodians of their money and saving and, you know, purchasing things at the right time and purchasing things the right way. And, you know, I really feel like when I look at my grandparents and the example that they set, that, you know, I certainly didn't follow in my youth, but the example that they set, they didn't buy into the program. Like, they weren't leveraging themselves with loans and debt and, you know, paying high interest to financial institutions and organizations. They were living a very self-sufficient life. And because of that, they ended up in their retirement with a large amount of money that they could live on through their retirement. And a beautiful home, and they always had nice cars, and, you know, they were in a position to help and support every member of my family financially because they were such good custodians of their money. So I think if somebody were to ask my grandmother before she passed away if she felt that she was financially wealthy, she probably would have said something like, well, I don't feel like I'm wealthy, but I'm comfortable. And to me, with the life that she led and how she really embraced financial custodianship, like, to me, from my perspective, she was beyond wealthy financially. She was beyond wealthy financially because she had the means and the ability to do basically everything that she wanted to do in her life. She vacationed a lot after my grandfather passed. I mean, she and my grandfather vacationed a lot, you know, when they were married and together, like cruises to Alaska and all these other amazing things. But, you know, she spent her retired years doing the things that she desired to do with and for her children and her grandchildren, and having the financial means to do that. So, you know, in my book, that's financially wealthy. But I want to talk a little bit about holistic wealth, because to me, you hear me say all the time, it's your divine birthright to be wealthy in all areas of your life. Like, and you're worthy and deserving of that simply for being a being on this planet. There's nothing else that you have to do to be worthy of, you know, having wealth in all areas of your life. And the word wealthy, you know, comes from two words, well and healthy. So to be wealthy means to be well and healthy. And I don't believe that we actually can even have sustainable financial wealth, especially in this new paradigm, if we are not looking at wealth as from a holistic point of view, having wealth in all areas of our life. I believe that financial wealth becomes sustainable when we have wealth in all the other areas of our lives. So wealth in our relationships, and you know, that means our platonic relationships, our friendships, our familial relationships, our intimate and romantic relationships, like having wealth in all of those relationships, having wealth in our health. This is one of the most important things. And this one, I believe that my grandmother was like such an incredible model of. Again, she grew up in rural Idaho and then ended up living in Burley, Idaho, Rupert, Idaho, and Pocatello, Idaho, most of her life. But she always had a garden. And my grandmother, you know, up until the week that she passed away, was still one of the most intelligent and cognitively with it women I've ever met in my life. Even at 97, 98, right? Her brain, her memory, her long-term memory blew mine out of the water. Her ability to like pay attention to details, remember details. She was a beautiful, beautiful singer. She played the piano. She was a music teacher, and she just, you know, had this memory bank of music and songs in her brain. But I think one of the things about her that is so fascinating is that she always grew her own food. You know, she grew up in rural Idaho, so her family grew their own food. She always grew her own food. She always, she had a farm for many years in Rupert, Idaho, where she raised her own cattle that she slaughtered in the fall and then ate those for the whole next year. She always had a garden where she grew all of her own fresh vegetables and herbs, and she cooked with those. She used very little pesticides or organic, at-home remedies for pests whenever possible. So she wasn't eating processed food very often, almost never, I would say. Occasionally I think she would go out and have something, but she was, eating healthy food from her garden that wasn't sprayed with pesticides, that wasn't genetically modified or engineered. And I really truly believe that because of that, the way that her intellect was able to stay intact because she wasn't poisoning her body. She also never drank. She never drank alcohol. So she just was like really, I feel, physically and health-wise so wealthy. And even as she started to age and got older, she definitely had some things that she dealt with as she aged and got older. One of them was, she did end up having breast cancer and having a mastectomy, but the way that she dealt with that and the way that her mindset, and so wealth and her mindset as well, always like so positive and like could get through anything. Like even with the breast cancer, it was like, oh, this is just, something that I have to deal with right now and I'm going to be fine, and she just always emanated that positive energy. And so even through the mastectomy, and then, she had some heart stuff happen to her as she got into her late 80s and early 90s. And, there were some bouts of illness and sickness, I think, that come with, general aging that she dealt with. But overall, just such an incredibly healthy woman. She was still living in her own house. My cousin and his wife had moved in to like help her out, but she was doing tons of things unassisted. Just a few months ago, she refinished a giant piece of furniture on her own. She was still canning. She was still cooking. She was still gardening. And to me, I'm like, that is a life of being truly wealthy. If you're 97, about to turn 98, and you're living on your own and you're still doing all the things that you love to do, you have been truly wealthy in your life. And so there's the physical part, right? And, in her relationships, like it was just a woman that, valued her friendships, valued her familial relationships, valued her children, her grandchildren, her husband, and really made those things the priority in her life. And so I'm just, I'm so incredibly thankful to like have this model. And, as this week has gone by, to just be reminded of how she tapped into wealth in all areas of her life and how she really modeled for me and my cousins, like what life actually should look like, how we should be engaging in life and how we should be, showing up in the world. And so, it's like now it's sparked this kind of like I said, this like desire to rebirth or revitalization or like, looking at things from a different perspective. Like, how can I be healthier? How can I focus more on my relationships with my children? That message from my middle son was really, really beautiful. But in there, there was a big focus on work in his message. And while I think it's great, because obviously I don't think that he could recognize those things in me if they weren't values of his, I'm like, I'd really love like the L to be like, you love your children. And I'd really love the H to be like, is really healthy, And so it was an eye opener for me of like where I need to focus in my life to bring myself more into balance holistically when it comes to wealth. So, this podcast is just a reminder for all of us that, money's great. And, I enjoy having money. I love being able to afford to travel in luxury. I love being able to have nice things. I love being able to provide the lifestyle that I provide for my children. Like all of that's really, really incredible. And there are other parts of my life that I want to be known for. It's like, I don't want to just be known as the wealth witch. I don't want to just be known as a woman who worked hard and was, goal oriented and super driven and made heaps of money. Like, I would like to be known as that, and a woman who was super loving to everyone around her, a woman who prioritized her relationships, a woman who prioritized her health. And so, it was a really great kick up the ass, really, of like, okay, what is it that I truly, truly want to work on and desire to work on in 2022? And holistic wealth has always been important to me. But, now I think you're just going to see me putting much more of a focus on that in my life. And that includes sharing my other gifts as well. So I, was kind of joking about prophetess, but I've been playing around with, like, I think I'm going to add onto my website, prophetess. One, my good friend Dane Thomas used to call me that, early on in my journey of, before I actually became the wealth witch, priestess of profit, and the prophetess, he would call me. So PROFITESS, because I do have, this forecasting gift that I've been given. And, I use it in my monthly wealth forecast. I use it in the yearly wealth forecast. But I think I'm going to be stepping more into that work, and you may be hearing more of that in this podcast as well. So, more of that oracle side of me, more of that prophetess side of me. But of course, we'll always combine it with abundance and prosperity and expansion in those areas as well. So, it's just, I'm in a little bit of a reevaluation period of my life and of what's important. And, it's always going to be so important for me, for you to step out of financial slavery consciousness and out of financial internment. So I can't imagine that this podcast is going away anytime soon, but we may start talking about some other things in here, like, what it means to, how we actually support ourselves to become more financially abundant when we are focused on our health, or how we support ourselves to become more financially abundant when we are prioritizing our relationships in our life. So that's it. Just back again. I'm here, and I'm actually really excited because I'm spending the rest of this week with my dear friend, Michelle Patrick and Taryn Lee. And Michelle and I are in the middle of launching our incredible 6-month deep dive journey into self-mastery. And so, speaking of radical wealth and transformation and holistic wealth in health, like, this program really is the thing that jump started me into that. And I can't wait for this round, because I recently realized that some of my thyroid stuff had been a misdiagnosis, and I'm really looking forward to taking this next 6 months to dive deeply into my new diagnosis, which is 3rd stage adrenal fatigue, and writing that. And I know that I have the power to do that. I know that I'm the most powerful creator in my reality. So, more on that on this journey as well as we go into this new paradigm of 2022. And, my hope for you is that you prioritize holistic wealth, and that, the thing that I really truly know is that when we find wealth in all other areas of our life, financial wealth has no choice and no option but to show up. So if you want to know more about Becoming Immortal, which is my 6-month program with Michelle Patrick, then you're definitely going to want to click the link in the show notes to find out more about that. We are starting at the end of March. And Michelle and I are going to be recording a podcast together for next week. So you'll be able to hear us talk a little bit more about holistic wealth in the realm of health on next week's show. So until then, have an amazing rest of your day, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world as you are listening to this podcast. Remember, it is your divine birthright to be wealthy in all areas of your life. You are so worthy. You are so deserving. You are the most powerful creator in your reality, so go out there and create holistic wealth for yourself. And rest in paradise to my dear grandmother, Barbara Ravenscroft Fagg. That's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to connect with me on social media and reach out. I love hearing from you. And if you want more of me, real, raw, and uncensored, make sure to join the Wealth Witch Telegram channel. It's my free channel where I share all of my random daily musings as well as the information that I feel like is important and pertinent to my community. We've put a link to the Telegram channel in the show notes, so make sure to come join us over there if that intrigues you. Remember, wealth is a mindset, and you are the most powerful creator in your reality. Until next time, this is the Wealth Witch signing off.
I'm gonna live. The time is right.